dayamoi tumi jani okodin doyamoi tumi durga mete dukkha orama tvam hitara amarma tvam hitara. Tumi jole, tumi stole, tumi adyamule koma. Tumi jole, tumi stole, tumi adyamule koma. Ocho sorbo kote akshopute sorbo kote akshopute shakara karnira karoma tvam hitara amarma tvam hitara. Triguna dhara pora orama tvam hitara. Tvam hitara amarma tvam hitara. Tumi sandhya, tumi gaya, tumi jogodatri koma. Tumi sandhya, tumi gayatri, tumi jogodatri koma. Tumi akulera trana kodri key to knowledge is in the mother's keeping. Commune with Brahman when she graciously unlocks the door. O mind, remain immersed in meditation on Mother's feet. Remain immersed and escape the suffering of life. Sing the glory of Mother and fill your heart with light. The world becomes a river of bliss. In it paddle slowly. O mind, remain immersed in meditation on Mother's feet. Remain immersed and escape the suffering of life. All these words are unreal. In vain you roam about them, so meditate on Mother in your heart. Sing the glory of Mother and fill your heart with light. The world becomes a river of bliss. In it paddle slowly. Sing the glory of Mother and fill your heart with light. The world becomes a river of bliss. In it paddle slowly. In it paddle slowly. Sing Mother's glory. And we'll do one more. This is a nice one. May all the intensity of my love go to thee, sweet Lord, go to thee. May all the whispers of my silent aspirations reach your ears, O Lord, reach your ears. respond at once to your call, and may all the sorrows on the way vanish at your pull, sweet Lord, vanish at your pull. This begging bowl of my life, it's filled with alms from the world. May that be completely emptied, and may my heart be filled with gifts from thee, sweet Lord, with secret gifts from thee. May all the intensity of my love go to thee, my Lord, go to thee. May all the whispers of my silent aspirations reach your ears, my Lord, reach your ears. May all the intensity of my love go to thee, O Lord, go to thee. All right, so we're picking up here with Brother Lawrence and his practice of the presence of God. And we read some of the most beautiful verses last week, some of the things that he said, two of which I want to remind us of just to start the evening, because it's a lovely mood. It's a lovely space to be in. He says, I keep myself by a simple attention and a general fond regard to God, which I may call an actual presence of God, or to speak better, a habitual, silent, and secret conversation of the soul with God, which often causes me joys and raptures inwardly, and sometimes also outwardly, so great that I'm forced to use means to moderate them and to prevent their appearance to others. He goes on to say, the King, the divine God, full of mercy and goodness, very far from chastising me, embraces me with love, makes me eat at his table, serves me with his own hands, and gives me the key of his treasures. He converses and delights himself with me incessantly in 1,000 ways, and treats me in all respects as his favorite. It is thus that I consider myself from time to time in his holy presence. I so enjoy reading that, because so many times when we talk about God, it's about how we feel and what we're talking about, because we see ourselves as the actor and God very much as the listener, which is the irony of Maya, the irony of this reality that we live in, is that it's the opposite. God is the only doer, and we are only a witness, just a witness. And how Ramakrishna reminds us of that we are only the doers in this world. And that's a very high teaching to understand. But to see him talking about knowing and having such a deep experience and interactive faith with the divine, that he can sense God delighting in him. Not him delighting in God in 1,000 ways, which we're very accustomed to, but God delighting in him in 1,000 ways. Feeding him at his own table, feeding him with his own hands, just this delight of interaction. And to grow to that level of faith where your ego gets so silenced that you can see the movement of God, you can experience the presence of God, which is what he says there, that he first starts with this simple attention and general fond regard to God, which I call an actual presence of the beloved. It reminds me of Ramakrishna when he was asked by Vivekananda, have you seen God? And Ramakrishna says, of course, I see him now, even more clearly than I see you. That means that there's a state of knowing, a state of being, within which we can occupy and see and experience the movement of God more clearly than we see egos, more clearly than we see the individual selves that are separate and apart and fenced in by the limitations of ego, by our restrictions. Vivekananda says, and I always remind us, that which we cherish the most in our lives, our personality, our bodies, our minds, that they're nothing but a set of limitations and restrictions. They're just a fence, a set of ideas that you've called you, your things that you like and dislike, and that there's no reality to them. You can be free in this moment. Your story that's stored in your mind, or your set of karmas that you store and carry with you in your mind, that rolling ball of samsara, which is your life, that you own and grasp onto so tightly, is optional. That this moment is always free. This moment is always every color, every taste, every smell. This moment is divine. And by bringing yourself to this moment, you can share in that purity. You can share in that freedom. But to come to the moment, the story has to stop dead in its tracks. The story of who you are and what you think and what you want and what you dream and what you idealize. It has to stop short in this moment. And to leave the mind sitting in a pregnant silence, full of inspiration, full of this experience of faith. To bathe in that understanding of the unconditioned love that embraces you in every moment, regardless of the experience of mind and body in that moment, whether the body's in pain, whether the mind is in anger, or whatever states things may be in. To know them as only story, and to be able to push them aside, to just set them aside, and in that silence sit with your beloved. Sit with this divine knowledge that God delights in you in 1,000 ways, that he embraces you and dreams of your life and enjoys you as you are in the moment, not as you imagine yourself to be in the story, but as you are in your isness of being, free in the moment, because you're his very own. You are, in fact. So tonight, he starts off and says, if sometimes my thoughts wander from it by necessity or infirmity, and that it is the divine name, the divine presence, I am presently recalled by inward motions so charming, so delicious, that I am ashamed to mention them. I desire your reverence to reflect rather upon my great wretchedness, of which you are fully informed, than upon the great favors which God does me, all unworthy and ungrateful as I am. So this beautiful negation of the ego, this beautiful negation of his story, that he would claim any responsibility, that he would claim any doership or accomplishment in this relationship with God. He's come to a place of knowing there's nothing that you need to do or can do to earn or to achieve this relationship with God. This kind of knowing, this kind of relationship is done purely through surrender, through letting go of all sense of I and me, and I can do, and I'll become, and I'll fix, and I'll be pure, and I'll make it right, and I'll teach, and I'll tell. All of these motions of vanity he's let go of. And he says that when they get in the way, when any idea about myself, with any idea about my problems, any ideas about my likes and my dislikes, my needs, my conditions, the circumstance of my life, whenever my thoughts wander in that direction and leave the name, leave the presence of the beloved, leave my awareness of being, he says, I'm charmed back into it by the memory of God, that God won't let that happen. Now, he's been at this point practicing for 30 years, we know from last week's readings. So it's been 30 years, the first 15 of which were just a hard, continual practice of trying to bring the mind back and put it on God over and over again, multiple times of the day. That he's not talking about his practice, the periods set aside for prayer or devotions. He's talking about every minute of the day he was aware of the thought of God and watching the mind and teaching himself to become aware of what the mind was paying attention to. And any time it wandered, he brought it back to the name. This is extremely important because that is what is meant by taking refuge in God. When God says, take refuge only in me, he's saying, leave your mind, leave your story, leave your desires, leave your distractions, and come to the moment by reciting the name. Bring your mind into my presence, into the awareness of my presence, which is always there and always perfect. And in that space be established, and guard that space carefully with your awareness, to make sure you're watching the mind, that it doesn't wander into the story, it doesn't wander into its longings and its conditions, but it stays present in the pure moment where there is only stillness, always, regardless of the freeway noises, regardless of the birds, regardless of the conditions of heart and mind. The moment is always silent. The moment is always pure. The moment is always stable, always secure. And by taking the name, you can find it. You can find that stillness within that you left a very long time ago when you took on the life of construction, the life of building. So he says here, I'm presently recalled by inward motions so charming and so delicious that I'm ashamed to mention them. He gets embarrassed. It's like your mother dropping you off at school and tickling your chin and giving you a kiss goodbye, and you're like, Mom, stop it. I'm in public, This is how he's feeling as he's writing to his senior, one of the senior monks. And he's writing to get this man, this teacher's opinion about his practices. So you see his humility even in that. As accomplished as he is, and as full of the divine as he is, he knows himself as an ego self to be wretched. That this ego self that bears the name and bears the ownership of our actions, it can never be good because it's born of a will separate and apart from our nature, from who and what we are. It can never be beneficial to us because it's looking for something that it needs, whereas if it knew itself as it is, it would know there are no needs, that the present moment is always full and perfect. The presence of God is always enough to carry you through any experience, any condition of mind, any story of the world. And he holds on to that humility, and he's telling this teacher, he's saying, although I'm sharing things that seem grand and seem like great accomplishments, as I tell them to you, I don't want you to give the credit to this. I don't want you to respect this. There's nothing here. It's by surrendering what is here that I have found these things. It's by denying this here that I have found the presence of the beloved. And so he says to him, he says, see me, always reflect rather upon my great wretchedness, of which you are fully informed. Probably the man is his confessor, maybe. And then upon these great favors which God does me. So this is a knowing. If you have a great meditation, it's not your fault. It's God's love. It was God's grace to you. If you manage to overcome your difficulties in life, it's not because you're a great practitioner. It's not because you finally mastered meditation. It's because God loves you. Because that divine love is weaving its way into your psyche, into your heart, into yourself, into breaking down those gates of separation, that wall that you've built around yourself, saying, from here to here is me, and everything over there is, maybe it's God, maybe it's the world, maybe it's the universe, whatever it is, I don't know, and I don't trust it, and I'm terrified by it. But in here, this is me, my domain. The problem is we mess that up all the time when we're in charge of our own domain. And so really letting God in, breaking down that fence of ego. He says, as for my set hours of prayer, they are only a continuation of the same exercise. This is something that I've worked on so much with, so far I'm still begging. But this notion of life as practice. That when you get up in the morning and you do your meditations, you're not doing something within an hour for something down the road. What you're trying to do is set your state of being for the day so that it's actively in that state for the rest of the day. It's not, oh, now I'm done with my meditations, now I can go out and have fun, or I can go out and go to work and go do the things I really have to do. That's not what it was about. It was about sitting in the presence of the divine and establishing yourself there so that the rest of the day is a continuation of that habit, a continuation of that effort, a continuation of that mindset. So he says, as for my set hours of prayer, they're only a continuation of the same exercise. Sometimes I consider myself there as a stone before a carver, whereof he is to make me a statue. Presenting myself thus before God, I desire him to form his perfect image in my soul and to make me entirely like himself. Because to be like God is to be authentic, because it's your nature. It's what you are. You're not borrowing some grand personality from the sky. You're not trying to mimic something else, something other than yourself. You're trying to return to your authentic self. You're trying to return to that center of who and what you are so that you can act naturally and freely. You don't have to put on airs. You don't have to put on personalities. You don't have to be witty. You don't have to be funny. You don't have to be hardworking. You don't have to be better. You don't have to fix anything. You're in the presence of the Beloved who formed you as you are and has given you everything that you have and has brought you to a place like this to become aware of that love, to become aware of that presence. So sometimes I consider myself there as a stone before the carver. Now, what role does the stone have when it sits before the carver? All right? Does the stone have to practice being still? Does the stone have to, make sure its arms stay down so that it doesn't get in the way? The stone does absolutely nothing. And that is how we should know our spiritual life really is. It's an act of surrender, not an act of doing. And we present ourselves to God as the stone that's being carved. God is making the changes. God is presenting the insights. God is giving the awareness. God is giving the love. God is the one receiving it all. You're just watching, just soaking in the presence of this divine. This is a very practical way of doing things. It's like it takes prayer more deep into the self. Like when you're in a difficult circumstance, our efforts usually are to try and verbalize that to God in a prayer, as if God was something else, and we have to explain to him, oh, I'm having such a hard time, and all these things, my mind is here, and I'm thinking this, and I'm struggling with that, and I can't get over this constant cycle that I'm stuck in, where I keep falling into my bad habits or even my good habits. I just keep circling. You don't have to. The stone doesn't have to sit there and describe itself to the carver. The carver, I read the life of Michelangelo, and he always talked about he would look at the stone and he would see what it is. When he looked at the stone that became the statue of David, he didn't have to, do anything. He looked at the stone and he saw David, and he just removed the unnecessary bits. That's the essence of our spiritual practice. God looks at your stone of a head, your thick skull. He looks at you, and he doesn't have to imagine or try and come up with something to do with you. He sees that divinity in you. And so little by little, with great patience and great love, he removes the unnecessary. And lo and behold, you become a statue of David. You become a perfection. You become a beauty. And it wasn't your doing. It was you sitting with that attention to the carver, surrendering yourself to be made into your image, into that image of the divine. And so when you sit there before God, no need to describe yourself. Just be in the presence and be aware of that presence, and then give God permission to look everywhere and let him in, into your deepest trouble, into your most impure thought, into the most difficult place that you sit. Don't present it to him with an idea of what needs to be done. Open to him and let yourself be fully seen. Become fully aware of all that God can see as he looks within you at all that is present. The deepest, darkest, most beautiful, and most hideous places. Simply let the divinity in. Why? Because that's what transforms you. That's what feeds your surrender and allows you to become holy. Yes, sir.
So God or the divine can already see what's in us, the devil and the sin. So what's the need for verbalizing it?
There is no need for verbalizing. That's what I'm saying. But it is there's a need for a conscious surrendering, a conscious opening, because you need to become aware of the devils and the gods within you. You need to see what is going on in there. Swami Prabhupada said something to me very important. He says, hold your troubles before the Lord. He says, because the knots of Maya come undone of their own accord in the light of awareness. So it's purely becoming aware of your own self, becoming aware of this divinity, which is that presence of God within, and opening to it, not trying to cover, not trying to hide, not trying to be, not trying to fix, not trying to do, but simply opening up to the beloved and let him see you as you are. And in that exercise, you see you as you are. And if, because your nature is divine, and because the presence of the beloved is divine, in that awareness, the healing happens. In that awareness, the surrender happens. In that awareness, your renunciation happens. Your discernment becomes clear. You see things as they are, and you go forward effortlessly, because you are not the sculptor. You are the rock. You just make yourself available to the beloved in the most pure, open, and honest way that you possibly can. All the time, continuously, like he's saying here. So sometimes I consider myself as a stone before a carver. He is to make a statue, presenting myself thus before God. I desire him to form his perfect image in my soul and to make me entirely like himself. What is it to be entirely like the divine? It's to be motivated by love alone. It's to be motivated by intelligence alone. It's to be fully present, to know what isness is, devoid of all attribute, to know that silent, tranquil, immortal, eternal self, and to sit in that place. At other times, when I apply myself to prayer, I feel all my spirit and all my soul lift itself up without any care or effort of mine, and it continues as it were suspended and firmly fixed in God, as in its center and its place of rest. Wow. That's almost intoxicating just to read. At other times, I apply myself to prayer. I feel all my spirit and all my soul lift itself up. Again, that passive experience, not the doer. Not because he's not saying I lift myself up before God and hold myself there in this space. Not at all. He says I sit there quietly, and in that presence of God, the soul does what? It rises up. It's inspired. It's carried on by a love that it can't find anywhere else, of a quality and a depth that it has never known from the senses or from others and relationships and whatnot. My soul and my spirit, I feel them lift themselves up without any care, no anxiety, no diminishing thoughts of self, no recoiling because of your impurity, no recoiling in defensiveness because of your failure and how awful you are as a person. None of this. That's aside. In that stillness, you've surrendered even that, because those things are equally ego. To come up with an attribute for yourself is an egoistic move. Whether it's to call yourself good or to call yourself bad, both are egoistic. Both are there to feed the ego. Ego can feed off of negativity as much as it feeds off of an over-positive view of ourselves. And we should be aware of that. And it's an act of surrender to be quiet, to surrender that before the Lord. And it's an act of faith to not be afraid. It's an act of faith. In what? This perfect grace of your lover. The perfect grace of your divine self, who always hopes in you, always believes in you, always trusts in you. This is what we worship. This is what we know. This is what the sages see. I know that some charge this state with inactivity, with delusion, and a self-love. I confess that it is a holy inactivity, and would be happy, and would be a happy self-love if the soul in that state were capable of it. Because in effect, while she is in this repose, she cannot be disturbed by such acts as she was formerly accustomed to, and which were then her support, but which would now rather hinder than assist her. This is an important clue as to the state of this self. It would be self-love if your focus was on your ego self. If your focus was on what you're doing in this moment. Oh, I'm surrendering so well. Ooh, I'm having such a wonderful experience. Oh, I'm having such a moving time with God. Oh, I love this feeling in my heart when I do this. Oh, I love that. If that's the perspective, then yes, it's a self-love, it's an egoistic journey. But you're in silence. What's coming is coming, and what's going is going, and you're not grabbing, touching, describing, holding anything. You're allowing it to rise, and you're allowing it to settle. It comes, it goes. There's no attachment in this. It would be laziness or that inaction if you were doing it for the sake of not doing something else. If you were taking refuge in the not doing itself. But that silence is pregnant with action. That stillness is pregnant with movement, the movement of inspiration, the movement of security, the movement of establishment, that strength that comes from that. That's where all of the strength comes from, actually. Because in this state, what happens is you get to the source of your thoughts, you get to the source of your desires, the source of your weaknesses. And you can win in a second because they are all less than a baby in this point. None of them have blossomed, bloomed, or sprouted. And so in this state of awareness, as soon as you feel the seed of that desire even begin to flicker, you take the name of God. That's your refuge. And it's not big enough to fight you. It's not big enough to argue. You caught it immediately. And you doused it with the name of God, and you return to that presence of the beloved. The problem comes when you don't have that awareness, when you are caught up in the cycles of your stories, and your demons are able to sprout and grow and then fight. And then you have to argue with this whole litany of thoughts that have built the situation. They've built up your lust, or they've built up your desire for pleasure, or they've built up your anger, or they've built up your jealousy, and now you're in the middle of it and you're trying to fight. You won't win. You've already given in. At that point, you fight only long enough to feel good about fighting, and then you give in to your vice. And then you're, oh, I'm so sorry, Lord. I didn't mean to do it. I tried not to, see? And you justify yourself by your own deeds and by your own efforts. And where is the surrender in that? Where is the presence of God in that? It's just another story of the ego. Yes?
So I find myself in that situation over and over.
Yes, we do.
So if I'm in that situation, like how to get to that point when the desire is really small?
Do this practice for 15 years. There's not a short answer. The grace of God is always present, and the wind is blowing. So you pray with that level of sincerity, and this moment it's yours. There's no doubt in that. If it's not yours in this moment, then chip away, by just being in the presence, continually bringing yourself back to the present. Someone wrote me an email today. I still have to answer it, asking how do I practically do the yamas and the niyamas, in my life, the practice of doing the virtues and avoiding the vices. You don't have to get involved in that. You don't have to get down to that technical level. Be in the presence of God and you'll act properly. All right? Be in the presence of God. You're not going to do what you think you might be doing. You're going to be in the presence of God. And so don't leave the presence of God. And those vices will not grow. Those, call them temptations, since we're looking at a Christian scripture, those temptations won't grow, won't get big enough to fight. As soon as you smell them, as soon as you hear the ripple, immediately you're back at the feet of the beloved. Oh God, do you see it? And then you just show it to him. You don't even have to pray something about it. You don't even have to mention it. It's better if you don't, because you don't want to put the mind on it. You don't want to give the mind that permission to think about it, to ruminate on it, to sneak in how nice it was the last time, or how good it would be to have that. You don't want any of that to happen. So immediately you're just inundating your own mind with your nature, with God, with the presence, with the richness of isness. And so you dwell there. And that's how you do it. It's not overnight. We're looking at 15 years before he said he was established in it, where he would never forget the presence of God. And now he's 30 years into it, where he's experiencing these divine ecstasies and this bliss so profound that he has to hide it from people so they don't think he's crazy, running around giggling and laughing and absorbed. Yes, sir.
Are you talking about Vivekananda?
We're talking about Brother Lawrence.
Oh, Brother Lawrence.
Yes, Brother Lawrence. But it could be Vivekananda, absolutely.
The time span would be different.
The time span very different, maybe. Who knows how those things are. But yeah, this could be any spiritual practitioner. That's the thing that he's very adamant about saying about himself. There was nothing special about him. He was kind of a clumsy, dopey guy who didn't have a lot going on intellectually, and joined the monastery in the same reason a lot of people join the military, just trying to get their life together, just trying to get some structure and some strength. And actually he derived this practice from that space. He was like, I knew I wasn't smart enough to go in there and learn the Greek and the Hebrew and to study, high philosophy and the upper echelons of theology. I couldn't get that stuff. I worked in the kitchen. I was the cook. So I just decided that I would always think of God. And that would be my practice. And there would be no boundary to it. That in the time of prayer and the time of cutting vegetables, I would be the same. The effort would be the same. And that's it. That's the simplicity of it. That's the delight of it. To me, that's the essence of truth. You don't need to, just like the Gyanis say, there's nothing to be done. You don't have to go through all of these academic gyrations unless you find that inspiration. Mother has her way with everybody. Everybody has their own path. But the actual way to God is very simple. Just realize the presence. That's why they call it realization. Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think that Brother Lawrence is having the sense that the spirit that he's relating with is autonomous, as if like maybe it's got, because he talks about the spirit delighting in him. And one thing I never hear in Vedantic conversations is the sense of autonomy or intention that a higher spirit might have.
You've read the Gospel, right?
The Old Testament?
No, I'm sorry. The Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna? The Gospel of Ramakrishna? No?
Not recently.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a great way to read that. He definitely experiences Mother in that active way. He has conversations with her quite frequently through there where she says something to him and he's like, what?
Oh, wow.
Or where she does something and he responds, or she walks into the room and he is like overwhelmed with how beautiful she's dressed that day. So God, your devotion, and Thakur Sri Ramakrishna says this, your devotion will give form to God. And that form is real. It's not an imagination. You are the imagination. The presence of God is the real thing. And God will manifest as other according to your devotion. And in that purity of self, when you start coming to that level of being able to quiet the mind so that you can become aware of these more subtle things of reality, that your mind isn't so centered on sense and so centered on thought, that you begin to see the underlying reality.
Well, this is, you really hit it on the nose for me, is that I keep on feeling as though it's my own imagination, like it's wishful thinking. And I ran into the same issue when I was under the influence of sacred medicine, that a very special insights would happen, but then there was always that question, am I inventing this, or is this something autonomous, independent, or a being other than my ego?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to have to wrestle with that. In the beginning, it is imagination, because you don't have the faculty developed or honed for the real, as it were. So through that imagination, in Vedanta, imagination is not separate from the real. Vivekananda says you become what you think. This room here, this used to be just a space of scrub brush, just like the hill out behind up here on the hill, This space here. How did this happen? This happened because someone imagined it. Somebody imagined a temple and they drew it out and then they put money into it, then they put effort into it, and they got a bunch of people together and boom, a temple is here now. So imagination is the first step of manifestation, And so give God that space and he will inhabit it. And yes, for a while it will seem like you're imagining it, but then one day something will happen where you will become aware of something that you didn't know. You'll get an insight that you didn't have, So that's one way of thinking it. The other one is to come to realize, and not to shed a light on you, but how absurd it is for us to see ourselves as the doer. You say, I think it's my imagination. Well, exactly what is your imagination? And it's something you're doing. Well, exactly what are you doing and how are you doing it? And you'll come to realize you know nothing of your own imagination. You don't know how it's controlled. You don't know how it's functioned. You don't even know what it is. You couldn't even define it. Ask yourself, what is a thought? You don't even know what it is. Have no idea where it comes from or where it goes. And yet you'll own it in a second. You know? And yet you'll take responsibility for it immediately. You know, lift your hand like this. How am I doing that? I have no idea how I'm doing that. I'm barely even thinking it, and it's going. But I'll take responsibility for it. I'll put the eye on that in a second. That's the nature of that's the nature of ego, you know, to own all of this stuff. But you have no idea. How did your body become what it is? How did that happen? How does it function? You know, how does the heart keep going all day long? What is breathing? How does everything know what it needs? You know, how does your body figure out it's got a pimple on the ankle that needs to be fixed, and then go about fixing it, sending the white blood cells down there to figure it out and to fight some enemy that you can't even see, that you don't even know it's there. But you'll take responsibility in a second. I take care of my health. I stay healthy. You do nothing. You inhabit a body as a witness, and you take and steal from the divine, left and right. This is me. I do this. I want this. I get this. I accomplish this. I build that. You're a thief. You know nothing of the processes. You know nothing of the abilities. You just experience them and then own them. That's ego. And that's delusion. That's why we use words like that. So don't be afraid of it being imagination. Imagination is as hard to understand as God herself is to understand. It's as mystical as the moment. It's as inexplicable as existence. You know, this consciousness, which we say is everywhere. In the thousands of years of scientific research, we still don't even have a definition for it. We can't even say what it is. We don't know where it comes from or how it's produced or if it's produced. You know? So don't be afraid to imagine things. Blame it on imagination if you must. But then ask the next question. What does that mean? You know, like that.
This teaching is very much like the story of the lower bird and the higher bird.
Yes.
And he keeps lifting toward this thing with feeling tone and this reverence, this presence. And it's just so much like he keeps seeing this light and moving toward it. And it's the same with us. We're running around all the time in the left brain, and then we come and sit here and get into the right brains, and my God, what is this? And we begin to see our own higher self, and because we're lost in the world in our own lower self, and the opportunity we have here in the temple is to rise as he did toward that higher self, or the higher bird, which is sort of the revelation of you know, the thing I think I am, I'm not, and what I actually am is God, eventually, possibly. And that's all I have to say. But
Yes. No,
I just kept thinking of that higher bird.
That's it. It's a matter of inspiration. And the inspiration comes just by paying attention.
By what?
By paying attention. You know, when you start asking the questions, stop assuming that you know what's going on. Stop assuming you know what a chair is. Stop assuming you know what a bird is. Stop assuming that you know anything. And just start asking questions to find out, what do you know? You know, one of my most enjoyable, I don't know, one of my most interesting, let's just put it that way, meditations was, I'd been in the monastery, I guess, 3 or 4 years, and I was in the shrine. It was a beautiful day, and the sun was shining in the windows. And I thought to myself, what is the one thing that I know that depends on nothing else that I know? You know, and I just started going through my thoughts. What is the one thing I know that doesn't depend on anything else that I know? See where that takes you. It'll take you very, very deep, very, very, very quickly. And it will show you what a tangle of delusion the mind holds. That one false idea is supporting another one, another one, and another one, and another one, and another one, until it's got a name and a personality called you. But there's nothing there. Start lifting those thoughts up and start looking under them and try to find the one true one that's true in and of itself with no dependence, and see what you come up with. You might find yourself very close to what Brother Lawrence is experiencing here, because the only thing that I saw or that I can find is your isness. That's the only thing that's not dependent. It's just there. From whence it comes, what it means, what it is, how to define it, how to describe it, it will lead you right to God. It'll take you right to the beloved. I know that some charge the state with inactivity, delusion, and self-love, and I confess that it is a holy inactivity and would be a happy self-love if the soul in that state were capable of it. Because in effect, while she is in this repose, she cannot be disturbed by such acts as she was formerly accustomed to, and which were then her support, but which would now rather hinder than assist her. Yet I cannot bear that this should be called delusion, because the soul which thus enjoys God desires herein nothing but Him. If this be delusion in me, it belongs to God to remedy it. Let Him do what He pleases with me. I desire only Him, and to be wholly devoted to Him. You will, however, oblige me in sending me your opinion, to which I always pay a great deference, for I have a singular esteem for your reverence, and am in our Lord yours. And that's the end of his second letter there. So he says that it's self-evident that it's not a delusion, because there's nothing that it depends on. There's not a reason. There's not a cause and effect. This is isness. If the soul were doing anything, yes, I could call it a delusion. I could call it a laziness. I could call it an inactivity. But the soul is not in a state of responsibility. The soul is not in the sense of an egoistic I, where it's the attention is on this side of the equation. The soul is in a state of surrender in it. This is what is manifesting. There is no thought in it. It is not a machination of ideas. It's a surrender. It's a letting go. There is no goal. There is no place. There's just isness and an infinite possibility of the moment, the cessation of a particular story and the realization of an infinite song. How's that for poetry? But that is what he's sharing and what he's talking about here. And this marvelous, way of describing it, I presently recalled by inward motions so charming and delicious. I've never described my spiritual practice as delicious. But what a great word. You can just see, it's just delicious. It's charming. That's another word I've never used about my spiritual practice. But you see how free he is, how effortless this is for him, how sweet it is, and how trusting he is in it. He has known grace. He has touched a love that has no condition. He knows what that is. And that's what gives him that safety. That's what gives him his security. It's what's manifesting his joy and his love and his enthusiasm. And he wants nothing more than that presence. The safest desire of all, because he already has it. It cannot go away. It is eternal. It is dependable. For without it, your existence ceases. As long as you exist, that is your assurance that God is. He is your existence. He is your love. He is your ability to understand. Know that. There's nothing here that you're responsible for. There's nothing here that you've done. You've just collected things and called them yours. You've had thoughts that you liked, but you didn't even know what they were. They were just a thought.
I read a thing the other day that said, this is not a receiving life, this is a giving life. You give your life to this thing that you're speaking of here. You give your attention, you give your love, you give everything, but mostly you give yourself, and then you receive it. But if you're just trying to grab something to be that's just the world.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and there's a beauty in it, for sure, but it's a short-lived one, usually. We get exhausted by it after a while. But it's one of the first lessons of life, is it not? I mean, you're born how? With nothing, right? You bring nothing into the world with you except that which watches your eyes and listens to your ears. That's all you've ever had. And you live your life, however long it is. What do you leave with? You leave with nothing. That self-same entity that inhabited the body leaves it and walks away from it. Where is the getting? Where is the taking? What can you get? What can you take? Try as you may. Collect as much as you want. It's just going to be an abandoned pile when this self decides to leave it behind. That's the beauty in the Bhagavad Gita, when it says the self cannot be wedded, it cannot be burned, all of those things. We think that it's talking about a quality of the self. It's not. It's talking about freedom.
So,
It's talking about, is it this? It's talking about the freedom to know that you nothing can be taken from you. Nothing can be, you can't add anything to yourself, nor can you lose anything from yourself. What is there to fear in that? There's no fear. That's total freedom. You can collect nothing and you can lose nothing. What a beautiful way to live. Be free in this moment, knowing that nothing can be given to you and nothing can be taken from you. Know it to be a dream in that sense. You can work yourself to death in a dream all night long. What did you accomplish? You can dig a mine, you can build a house, you can build a whole city if you want. When you wake up, where is it? What did you do? What was added to you and what was taken away from you? Nothing. Just a story, a series of thoughts occurred in the mind. Know that to be the truth. This life is the same. You've never known anything but your own thought. All of your sensations that you think come from an outside world have only been in your mind. You assumed the outside world, and then you created it to explain it. But this that you're looking at is just a symbol. You've never seen this room. You've never seen it. It's impossible for you to see it. The light went in your eyes, and it became a signal. Possibly. All you got was the signal. And from that signal, you created these symbols for light. This symbol for a window, the symbol for another human being, the symbol for a chair. Because you've never seen any of it. You've never known anything but a thought. Your whole life and existence is just a string of thinking, a thought in the mind of God. Come to know that. Come to feel the immensity of that, the freedom of that. To know that God is your existence and has always been. This is the birth of bhakti, of love. To know that you have nothing, can get nothing, can do nothing, and to yet find an absolute security in knowing that all is well, because God is. You know an unconditioned love. You know a limitless grace. You know an infinite mercy, and you dared to trust it. And in that moment when you first dare to trust it, that will be the moment of your enlightenment. you'll be free. Jai Ma. Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji. Yes.
There is a question from online.
All right. An online question.
So the question is, what is the difference between consciousness and awareness?
Well, consciousness doesn't need the other to exist. Awareness needs the other. If there's nothing to be aware of, what is awareness? If there's one without a second, it's consciousness.
Another question, I'm not sure if it's related. Can you please elaborate upon the three beasts of the Great of Sinai?
The what?
The Great of Sinai. Can you please elaborate upon the three beasts of the Great of Sinai?
The three beasts of the, okay, maybe he's talking about, oh boy, let me see if I can remember them. One of them is laziness or inactivity. One of them is fantasy or imagination. What's that third one? The three beasts that we have to overcome. Well, one, I mean, it leads you into it. The first one, that laziness, is that inactivity, that not guarding your thought, not guarding the mind, not putting in the effort to to stay untrapped by the mind, uncontrolled by the mind. And when you fall into that laziness or that idleness of mind, then fantasy becomes the second beast that has to be overcome, because you'll start imagining a moment better than the perfect moment you inhabit. And in that imagining of a better moment than the perfect moment you inhabit, you get into all kinds of trouble. And the third one I'm not going to be able to pull up at this moment. I just stumbled on those in the Philokalia just about a month ago. I did a vlog on them when I read them, because I was very excited about them. You can write me at monkotronic@gmail.com. Okay, yeah, so just type that in there, and I'll answer in an email from the text itself. That'll be better. monkotronic@gmail.com. Hopefully I don't have 40 million emails in the morning, but so, all right, is that everything?
In Hinduism, I find that love itself is not enough. For all the love and devotion that Thakur had for Divine Mother, still he had to formally do sadhana under Bhairavi Brahmani. Why is that?
Well, Thakur is special in a way in that he wanted to follow all of the paths and prove the efficacy of all of the paths. And so he did all of the practices. He also lived as an example. He did not really need to do anything. He was born ever free and ever pure, ever perfect. There was a thin veil that Mother kept there for him so that he could enact his Leela, so that he could communicate with us. You know, it certainly would have been a great value for him just to sit in a room in ecstasy for 35 years and then pop out at the end. But to have, there wouldn't be much of a gospel. There'd be a pamphlet of one page, and he sat in one place in ecstasy for 35 years, and that was that. So Mother kept that veil over his eyes for our benefit. You know, he's an avatar, so he had no sense of self. He was a hole through which God was seen. And so God manifested herself through that hole, through the play of Thakur, through the play of the Divine Mother, through the play of Vivekananda this time. You know, that he came in that sense. So it's not that love is not enough. Love is all there is. I mean, love is one of the fundamental isnesses of the universe. It's inexplicable and infinite and immortal. So certainly love will always be enough. What won't be enough is your surrender to it, your acceptance of it, your faith in it, your trust in it. As long as the mind is your tool of choice, it will never have a complete picture of love. It will never have a complete picture of grace. That only happens at the death of mind, or the purification of mind, when mind and God become one. Mind and Brahman are the same when it's pure, when you've removed all sense of me and mine from it, in that pure mind. So yes, no, love is enough, but so is truth, so is intelligence, so is existence. Any one of them, describes a practice. Bhakti comes from the love, jnana comes from the intelligence, raja from isness. So the paths to God come from our own nature. So they are enough. Thakur lived his life not out of need or accomplishment, but as a play, as a whole through which we look to see God. We know what a perfect human being looks like. We know what a realized soul is, and thereby we know what we are in our truth, in our authentic self. And he played the play so that we would know how to get there, since that's how we approach it. Some of us didn't have to do that. Some of them just went to Thakur and got their gift and went away. It was finished. And some of us are still working on it. In that sense. All right. Jai Ma, Jai Thakur, Jai Swamiji. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.